really hearing a lot about vaccine distribution, as I'm sure you have, and we wanted to just give an update. This is the first in a series of webinars that we'll be giving on vaccines. And today we have a guest speaker, Jim Blumenstock from ASTHO, which is the Association for State and Territorial Health Officials, essentially the National Association of State Public Health Officials. And so I'm going to just give you a brief overview of sort of where things stand today, and then turn it over to Jim to talk with us about what states are doing, and he has kindly agreed to take questions. So, so let's just get started. The context, I just want to set some context here. You know, I think if you're like me, I read the news and it seems like there's about a dozen vaccines under review, and you kind of hear different timelines. And so I just wanted to—
Hey, Krista, yeah. Sorry to interrupt. We're seeing a presentation mode, not full screen yet.
Oh, okay, sorry. Is that better?
Yep.
Okay. So as I was saying, I just wanted to put some context around the state and federal planning for this. We're going to really focus in on the playbook, but I just wanted to set some context first. So the federal government spent $10 billion so far on vaccine development. We have purchased about 800 million initial doses. And that is really, we're purchasing doses from manufacturers that we think are going to come to market first. And so the fastest vaccine that's ever been developed was in the 1960s, the mumps vaccine, and that was done in 4 years. Meanwhile, Moderna went from a genome to shots in arms, I think, in 69 days. So right now we are racing in a way that we haven't seen before. There's 2 vaccines that are at the head of the pack. Pfizer has administered the second vaccine to 24,000 of their 44,000 participants, and Moderna has administered both doses of vaccine to half of its trial participants in the final phase of the trials. So those 2 vaccines are most likely to come to market first. The Pfizer vaccine requires a storage of 97 degrees below zero. Moderna is at 4 degrees below zero, but either way, these vaccines are very, very, very sensitive and will require some significant logistics around cold storage. So Pfizer has developed what they're calling thermal shippers, and they can hold about 975 doses, and well, a minimum of 975 doses, but and that they can stay unopened for 10 days, but once you open them, they can only be opened for 24 hours. So it's going to be difficult in rural areas because they just don't need 975 doses in one area. So the state might order, for example, or be allocated 2,000 vaccines, and then they package them up and send them into other areas. So that's a lot of logistics. Inside the shippers, there are multi-dose vials. So the Moderna vial, I believe, has 10 doses in a vial, and once you open it, it's only good for 6 hours. So you really have to schedule patients in a way that you can administer the doses without wasting vaccine, and of course, before it will go bad. Each of the 2 that are now the front runners require 2 vaccines, as I mentioned. Moderna is 21 days apart and Pfizer is 28 days apart. And those vaccines are not interchangeable. So you have to, if you start with the Pfizer vaccine, you have to get the Pfizer vaccine 28 days later. The EUA approval, oh, sorry, I guess I have a few extra bullet points here, but the EUA approval for FDA is emergency use authorization, and these vaccines will still operate under the emergency use authority, and they will still be collecting vaccine safety data, which complicates things a little bit for the reimbursement, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Manufacturers have started producing doses, and at this point, there's no pediatric option. These are adult vaccines. And then lastly, on the context, I just want to layer on top public perception. We have had a drop of more than 20% in people who have said that they would definitely get the vaccine. So we're at about half of adults saying that they will get the vaccine. So we do have some work to do to make the public feel comfortable, because even though we're moving fast and people like that we're moving fast, at the same time it gives them some pause about taking the vaccine, given how quickly it's gone. So now I'll just get into the planning and then turn it over to Jim. So as you know, this is at the federal level, we're being directed by Operation Warp Speed, which is a joint effort between HHS, Department of Defense, the White House. And this, as you can see, is complex because this is definitely a complex operation. There are different responsibilities for each area, but basically it's identifying the vaccines, overseeing the manufacturing, distribution, and the logistics around this. The goal is to have 300 million doses out to the American population in Q1 of next year. So the responsibilities are really on state and local governments, which is why we're so happy to have Jim here with us today. It'll be a very decentralized approach to distributing the vaccine. There is a centralized administrator, McKesson, and McKesson has a contract with HHS through the Childhood Vaccine Program to ship directly to states or to large healthcare entities. But again, the state, local governments are responsible for coming up with micro plans for how they intend to administer the vaccine and distribute it appropriately. So I have two slides from CDC. This is the first slide that we saw recently. Our expectation is that they will add urgent care centers onto this side of the slide. So we'll have, basically all the convenience options like retail pharmacies, retail clinics, along with urgent cares, and then your traditional doctor's office and hospital settings. This right here is the McKesson role, and then and I actually don't think you can see my cursor. The distributor role is the McKesson role, and then on the left-hand side, they will, the kitting is basically putting together all the ancillary supplies that you need to go with the vaccine. So they will send, along with the vaccine, the kit supplies. And then, believe it or not, CDC is also sending a physical card that will go to the people who got the first vaccine to remind them to get the second vaccine. So you're actually going to get a physical card from CDC. And then this is the second CDC slide I have, which I thought was a little bit more helpful in really seeing how this is all going to work. This is actually for the flu vaccine during pandemic, but this is essentially how this is also going to work, which is that the states are allocated a certain number of vaccines from the federal government, and then the large providers can also order directly from the distributor, and then the distributor sends it to the different entities. So again, I will tell you that the state is the most likely to get the bulk of the vaccine unless you can show that you're a large provider. And later on here, I have a definition of what the large provider is, and they'll be permitted to directly receive vaccine from McKesson. So these are the responsibilities of the state and federal government. excuse me, the state government. Now, when I say population prioritization here, there is a National Academies of Sciences report. The final report is coming out tomorrow that is going to make recommendations on population prioritization, but this will not be a federal mandate. States will be able in their micro plans to choose the population prioritization, and in some cases it may be delegated to the health departments, you know, so you could, you know, I guess conceivably have county by county differences between the priority populations. The coordination of provider enrollment, there will be a CDC provider enrollment, but the states will be actually administering that and coordinating that. So the providers will have to prove a few things before they can be enrolled as a administrator of the vaccine. The states will be distributing it to small and mid-sized providers. They're also going to be responsible for communicating to their citizens. You know, this is a difficult job, and there's a lot of great you know, organizations out there that are helping states to communicate with citizens, but the politics of this are difficult because anytime you're prioritizing certain populations, you know, there are going to be people that feel that they should also be prioritized and they're not. So, so that's going to be a tough job. Data collection and reporting to CDC, the public health registries will be responsible for that. And it has to be real time. So, you know, CDC is really demanding that it is that the public health registries are constantly reporting to them about how many people are getting it. And then, of course, monitoring and tracking. The structure is that each state will set up a vaccine implementation committee, and on that committee, there will be external partners. They will also set up an internal vaccine team, and you know, they want those teams to be diverse, legal, public affairs, planning, et cetera. And then those committees internally are going to be replicated at the local level. So imagine, you know, you've got your legal team at the state level working on various issues, and then they're coordinating with the counties who also have their own legal teams. Same with public affairs. They've got to coordinate messaging. It's going to be a really, you know, intense coordination feat on top of an intense logistics feat. So, you know, obviously the more alignment that state and federal, or state, local and federal can have, the better. So I know that CDC is talking to the national organizations like ASTHO, NGA, and CSL on a regular basis, and they're also talking to states on a regular basis. The state vaccine programs are very engaged with CDC, even down to the point of getting addresses of providers in their state so that they can reach out to them to get enrolled in the, to be providers. So there is very, you know, seemingly good communication right now. So this CDC has encouraged states to plan in 3 phases. So the first phase is limited doses available. So this is when we're really talking about the importance of focusing in on priority populations. And then we have a larger number of doses available. And then the third phase is really sort of the, you know, the regular course of business type vaccine, like we get the flu vaccine. What I'll say about this is that the limited doses are really probably going to be Pfizer and Moderna. But there are other vaccines like J&J, for example, has a vaccine that does not have a lot of the logistical complications of the early vaccines. And it's taking longer because they actually have to grow organisms. I'm not entirely familiar, but anyway, they could come online, and then you're going to have, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 different kinds of vaccines on the market. And some of those vaccines could be better or worse for certain populations. So from an inventory control perspective, providers are going to have to think about the kinds of populations that they're serving, and then which vaccine might be better for them. And then, you know, they're going to have an inventory system for all the different vaccines, and a storage system for the different vaccines, and a way of tracking all the different vaccines. So yes, having a larger number of doses is good, but with the larger number of doses is likely to come a diversity of different vaccines. So this is the draft framework from the National Academies on the prioritization, and I encourage all of you to watch tomorrow. There's going to be the final report listed. And I'm assuming that it will probably spark some news stories about people that have been left out, or questions about why certain populations are being prioritized. But the National Academies did put out the interim report and asked for comments, and so this was what they said their original ideas were around who should get the vaccine. And we'll see how much this changes based on comments that they will have received from stakeholders. This is the some of the more information about provider recruitment and enrollment. As I mentioned, states are already reaching out to providers. Some of this is going to be much more complex given the deep freezing that is required here. Large health systems are going to be more equipped to handle the deeper freeze, but retail clinics and urgent care centers are going to be better, and more convenient for people to not forget to get that second vaccine. So there's pros and cons for all of the different variety of providers. And I know that Pfizer and McKesson and CDC are really hard at work trying to figure out how to make this deep freezing work. The latest I heard was that they were going to send these, these boxes, and the pharmacy then could keep it in the regular refrigerator and then put dry ice on it. So, this will be worked out, but again, there's just going to be challenges related to the settings. As I mentioned, if you are a large enough provider, you can receive the doses directly. So that here is in the second lower half. If you can provide 150,000 vaccines a week and you have 200 sites, you can order directly from McKesson. Otherwise, they will be allocated to the state, and then the state is going to distribute them. So to the extent that you're not fitting into this category here in large provider, you should definitely be in contact with the state vaccination administration offices in your state. Because they're going to be organizing all of the distribution and also, enrolling the providers as required to be an administrator. The supplies will also be distributed through the state, and they will be distributed within 48 hours of the approval of the vaccine order. Now, CDC is not paying to reimburse jurisdictions, and I'm going to talk in a minute about how they're reimbursing for the administration of it. But the redistribution, so if you receive the vaccine, the state receives the vaccine, then they have to have staff and logistical challenges of then distributing that internal to their state, and that is going to be a state responsibility. As well as industry and inventory management. And I hope that Jim will talk a little bit about the kinds of challenges at the state level with accepting the vaccine and turning around and redistributing it to entities to administer. So the vaccine storage and handling, as I've mentioned, is very sensitive, and so you really have to have reliable storage. You have to have an accurate vaccine inventory system. You have to collaborate with any sort of mobile vaccination vans. That's all under normal circumstances is a challenge, but I think it's going to be even greater challenge now because we're going to have only priority populations, for example. For payment, the federal government is going to pay for the vaccine. We've already bought, the first 100 million doses of the front runners, and there will not be any cost sharing to the patients. So there's a prohibition on cost sharing, but there is some confusion around who is going to how the actual providers are going to get paid. So right now there is a statutory barrier to Medicare paying for the administration of the vaccine. And that is because Medicare cannot pay for a vaccine to be administered if it has emergency use authorization. And any of these vaccines are going to have emergency use authorization. So that has to be fixed, but I know that CMS is contemplating roster billing for these vaccines under Part B. So it'd be Part B billing, not Part D. I think we're expecting some guidance fairly soon. I'm not entirely sure how we get around this Medicare EUA issue, but I know there's lots of people working on it. In Medicaid, the HEROES Act has not been enacted, so it's likely that there will be some form of amendment to the Vaccine for Children program, and Medicaid will cover it even for adults under that program, and then of course adults that are enrolled in the ACA expansion population will have it covered. Commercial insurance is still a question mark. So if you'll remember, ACA covers preventive services and vaccines are preventive services. So it has to be covered at no cost to the patient. The question is just, the receipt. It's the point at which the provider is actually administering it to the patient. There's cost there. And so, how are commercial insurers going to reimburse that? Okay, last slide, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jim. The documentation and reporting is of critical importance to CDC. So there are, as I mentioned, registries at the state level, and I would say these registries are in various states of modernization. The federal government did build an additional system called the Vaccine Administration Management System. I think this has been under construction since June, so it's very, very new. I could be wrong, but it is a new system. I seem to remember that it was started in June, but it's going to be another system, again, that's new. And it is actually requiring information that some states are not allowed to provide. It goes beyond what the Public Health Registry has in it. And so there are definitely some alignment issues that need to be worked out. But this is meant to supplement existing state registries and will be a portal. I do think it is adding some confusion to the mix because people are confused about, well, am I required to report to both the Public Health Registry at the state level and also to the federal VAMS registry? So that remains to be seen. And then finally, the second dose reminders. As I mentioned, CDC is actually going to be sending physical cards along with the vaccines. But it's going to be really important to have either an EMR system or scheduling system that sends out reminders and makes sure that people come in, because if they don't get that second vaccine, then the first vaccine will be rendered pointless. So lots and lots of logistical hurdles, and states are at the forefront. So I'm very happy to welcome Jim Blumenstock to our presentation here. He's the Senior Vice President for Pandemic Response and Recovery at ASTHO, and has had a long career in public health. He was the Chief Program Officer for Health Security for 15 years at ASTHO, and prior to that spent 32 years as a career public health servant in the state of New Jersey, in the Department of Health there. And as you can see, has many accolades and awards, and is absolutely the right person for this job right now. And I'm sure that states are very happy to have him, and we're happy that he was able to spare a couple minutes to talk with us today. So I am going to stop sharing my screen so we can all see Jim, and so I'll turn it over. Thanks for being here.
Krista, thanks so much. I really appreciate this opportunity, and certainly thank you so much for that very kind introduction. So I do not have a PowerPoint, and my prepared remarks will be brief because I really look forward to sort of hearing your questions or comments. And Krista, from a process perspective, will it all be in the chat, or will we actually have audio connections with the audience?
Chat. Please
Okay.
put your in the chat.
Fair enough. That's great. Thank you.
And
So,
Kristen is going to read the chat, so she'll read the questions to you.
Great. Perfect. So, I guess my remarks, Krista did an outstanding job of sharing with you the key elements of the playbook and doing some really good interpretation of exactly what it says and what it doesn't say or provide. So I guess to start off with, the two thoughts that I'd want to share with you, we have all heard and talked about not only the pandemic being historic or unprecedented, but certainly many of the response components of it equally carries that label and notoriety. And certainly this mass vaccination campaign is part of that as far as historic. And because of that, I think everyone just has to realize that this truly is an all of nation, all hands on deck response. And it's also a work in progress. As rich information that the playbook and other materials have that Krista summarized for you, there's still a ton of stuff that's to be determined, that's being evaluated, assessed, guidance issued on an interim basis, tools and resources, literally as we speak, and will continue to happen over the course of the next couple of weeks or a couple of months. So I share that with you for a couple of reasons. Number one, to make sure you are clearly aware and appreciate that, so that doesn't add to your frustration level when you think you're able to get straightforward, solid answers from people in the know when answers don't exist yet. And I think also it may imply that there could be some minor changes in course of action as we move forward, as the vaccine hopefully will become available and we fully mobilize in the next several months into calendar year 2021. So I just wanted to sort of start that off and put everybody in the best mindset possible, not only because of the scope and magnitude, but also the current level of uncertainty. And then again, every day that the margin of uncertainty does shrink. So that is a positive note, clearly. So let's sort of talk about the playbook itself. Right now, that is the master planning guide that the jurisdictions, the state health departments, the local health departments, and those health departments that support the tribes and territories of the United States are following to develop their mass vaccination plans, recognizing that the plans that they will be submitting and they are required to submit by no later than October 16th will be their first version, first generation, and their interim plans, because clearly the plans will evolve as more information is known and as things develop. As part of that playbook, the information that was provided, I guess about 3 or 4 weeks earlier, was really a good set of information that provided the initial set of planning scenarios to consider, planning assumptions, and a checklist for state and local health departments to follow. And all of the jurisdictions actually have began planning for this campaign months ago, because clearly there are certain things that you could safely assume that will be part of what is necessary to mobilize a campaign of this type. And in large part, this is not the first rodeo that our nation or our current public health system has gone through. 11 years ago, we did H1N1, which was sort of a similar campaign. So there was a lot of lessons learned and a lot of tools and resources that were created 10 or 11 years ago that are readily usable or can be easily modified that we are now putting in play for the COVID campaign as well. But when we sort of talk about by the numbers, I do want to contrast, a few differences. When we did the H1N1 campaign 10, 11 years ago for the influenza pandemic, at the end of the day, we only vaccinated 90 million Americans. There's a lot of reasons why that number fell short of a reasonable percentage of our population. One had to do with the lack of predictability, and we were a little off on forecasting when vaccine would be coming, and it came pretty late in the flu season. And also because by many people's assessment, the pandemic was not as serious as it could have been. So the uptake in the flu vaccine didn't reach the desired mark. But even with that, for those of you that were involved 10 or 11 years ago, you have a full appreciation of how challenging and demanding that type of campaign was. So when you contrast that to the numbers that Chris shared with you, that Operation Warp Speed, and it is the goal to actually produce upwards and beyond of 300 million doses. When you look at a U.S. population of 330 million or whatever it is, that really is a laudable goal to vaccinate the majority of our population, hoping that people will want it and they'll come to receive a safe and effective vaccine. So the scale of our campaign is looking at that high side number of what it would take to vaccinate a majority of the population, in most cases twice, in a 21 to a 21 day period. So you do the math and you realize, sort of the order of magnitude of vaccination encounters that we have to have an infrastructure for. So that is all playing into the preparedness efforts as well. Also it's time of the essence. As Krista mentioned when she walked through the phases, it is possible that we will have usable vaccine by the end of the fourth quarter of 2020. And as soon as that becomes available, and we'll talk a little more details about those steps, that is really when there's an expectation that at least those highest of high risk components of our society in that 1A category will start to receive the vaccine. Then 2020 is basically where we'll systematically go down the priority list and expand the net for vaccination provision through 2021. And then the third phase is sort of what I would call steady state, where where there was an equilibrium between supply and demand. The pandemic is progressing to its endpoint, however you define that, and then whether it becomes an endemic disease like others, and then it just becomes an annual immunization or vaccination process, depending on what we learn and how the virus may change over time. So that's sort of the phase 3 of the steady state or the future. So right now, your governmental public health folks are looking at the phase 1, which is the immediate short term, to be followed very quickly by that longer, broader phase 2 component where most people will receive their vaccination opportunities. I stress that because that's an important feature when we talk about providers or provider sites that have an interest in becoming authorized vaccinator for COVID-19, which I'll come back to in a few moments. So real quick, when we talk about the vaccine, okay, as Krista said, there are 6 candidate vaccines. 5, I believe, right now are in phase 3 clinical trials, and they are being produced through multiple technology platforms. So they're all new and they're all different to each other. So that in itself presents a level of complexity, including the storage, the double dose having to match because they're not interchangeable, the importance of record keeping to ensure that if we need to monitor longitudinally to find out, not only uptake, but effectiveness and safety, that we have good records of individuals receiving the vaccination and also which type of vaccine they may have received, because there could be differences associated with that. When the FDA makes its determination of usability, and that could either be through an emergency use authorization or through a BLA, a biologic license application, that will basically then throw the final set of responsibilities from the FDA regulatory scheme to the CDC and HHS's determination on appropriate use. So the FDA recently has begun, and the administration has really done a strong campaign to make it very clear that robust, judicious, scientific principles will be applied to the determination of safety and effectiveness of this vaccine. When you look at the EUA, that's sort of a lower bar of basically benefit versus risk in an emergency environment. And obviously a full-blown traditional license in a BLA process is sort of that higher total robust due diligence effort. What CDC is saying is, what the FDA is saying is their process will be somewhere in between and probably closer to the BLA standard because of the importance and the stake associated with ensuring that safety and efficacy is documented and communicated to the public, not only for the COVID campaign, but also for the reputation and public acceptance of all vaccines. And you all know probably better than I, what we're trying to combat as far as vaccine hesitancy and a lot of mis and disinformation. So there's a lot at stake here, and they've made it very clear that they're cognizant of that and they will not sacrifice safety. And again, the soundbite we're hearing from Operation Warp Speed is that, it is measured speed, it's not reckless speed. And, any risk that's taken is more financial, not in the area of safety and efficacy. So I share that with you on their behalf, because that is clearly a message that they're continuing to convey. When CDC, then the ACIP had an opportunity then, an obligation to issue their recommendations. They will take into consideration the National Academy framework that's coming out tomorrow that Krista said, and then they will then insert those recommendations that will complete the picture as to which vaccines have been authorized or approved, and what its usability or authorized use will be in the different populations and subpopulations. So that's a process that the state health departments and local departments are preparing for right now. So some of the key elements, I want to stress in their planning effort. And if you look at the slide deck that Krista shared with you, there's two key slides there. One is where it lays out the 3 phases, and it talks about the category 1A and 1B. So that is the segment of our community that will be targeted to get the vaccine first. And as you see it principally makes reference to the healthcare workforce, individuals who medically are at high risk, and essential workers. And the importance here is that while the state health departments are continuing, as we speak, to recruit vaccination sites, vaccinators within their community, not every one of those will engage in this phase 1 activity. So for example, during H1N1, I think you would all agree, your pediatricians, your family practitioners, even your OBGYNs were quite engaged in vaccinating, all segments of the public. This vaccine initially is not going to be approved for probably children and pregnant women. So the issue is, as you sort of time out or stratify your campaign, the focus is on what entities would be best suited to satisfy the first phase activity, and then position everybody so when you throw the switch into you make a broader campaign, you could bring in those other community-based entities. The second point I want to raise on the graphic where Krista showed you the product flow, if you will, from manufacturer, distributor to the different receptor sites. Yep. So, nope, I'm sorry, go back. That's it. Perfect. So one of the challenges that we're facing is right now that from a lesson learned from H1N1, the U.S. government plans on sending direct allocations and direct shipping to the administration sites that are on the far top of that vertical row of sites. So you can see pharmacies, long-term care providers like nursing homes, home health aides, and of course, Indian Health Services and other federal entities. So the allocation and distribution will bypass your typical governmental control, if you will, and go straight to those entities as an efficiency step. But also there's an obligation to link in the inventories of the data flow and all of the other data collection and sharing, so that the state-controlled administration sites and services that are shown further down, okay, are integrated with all the data that was generated and collected from the upper half. So you can see here in the darker shade where it has doctors' offices, mass vaccination clinics that are your typical or traditional public health clinics. Those will continue to run. They'll be controlled by state and local health departments. They'll make the allocations. In some cases, they'll actually receive vaccine, and they'll either run or indirectly run those types of vaccination services throughout the communities. That will be principally the phase 2. The upper half, the lighter shade, will most likely be the phase 1. And even when you're looking at pharmacies, that really is not implying that will be your neighborhood community or chain drugstore where you and I or anybody else would walk in, on Christmas Eve and theoretically get a vaccine if it's available. The pharmacists and pharmacies will actually be used in a contractual sort of way to provide the immunization services to nursing homes and other types of long-term care providers, possibly essential service personnel. 10 or 11 years ago, when we talked about critical infrastructure, it was all about, the nuclear power plant workers. Now, after what we learned over the last couple of months, it's the meat packers and the produce and the poultry processing companies that provide the essential, food for our communities. So they're recognized possibly as essential service personnel that will get higher attention. And there will actually be site visits to these entities to provide the vaccine. So, in phase 1, primarily will be closed pots, closed points of distribution that will be either in a healthcare facility or a work site that's been deemed essential services. And then the services will be provided on a mobile basis, either through contract pharmacists or other mechanisms. So again, it's phase 2 where your broader community activities take place. And I guess, the couple of points that I want to close with, and then we get into a discussion, is, there will be a lot of data collection, sharing with a great deal of transparency and visibility. So as you or your members or your colleagues engage in this, there are basically 3 data tracks as I would see it. V tracks, first you're going to track both product and people, right? So V-Tracks, and this is a little bit of terminology, is the actual database that's going to be used to order and allocate the vaccine to get it from the manufacturer distributor to the site to be used. The VAMS or the IIS then interfaces with that will follow the individual that is going to get vaccinated and gets vaccinated. So I heard yesterday that the jurisdictions will have a choice, that they can either use their existing immunization information systems, assuming that they are broadened, updated, or modernized to meet the needs of this campaign, or they could use the VAM system, the Vaccine Administration Management System. But both will basically provide that service where people could register for vaccine, could have interfaces with the electronic medical records, feed into the immunization registries, report the data up in the system, so that would close that loop. And the last one is Vaccine Finder. Those sites that will be registered to actually be an authorized vaccination site, they have to sign a provider agreement, they're required to have specific training, and they also have to agree that they will update their vaccine availability status in Vaccine Finder. So anybody like you, me, or our next door neighbor, they want to go to the website and see where they can get a COVID vaccine that day, that they will basically have that ability to do that type of research. So that's another functional area that's currently in play for the current preparedness activities. And just in closing, so some of the, what are really the big picture issues here? Well, First top of the list every time we speak to anybody is the issue is, what is the communication strategy and communication plan to effectively explain not only the science, but the process, so that everyone eventually will get to a point where they have trust in the system and confidence in the product to make an informed decision about getting themselves and their loved ones vaccinated. On a blue sky day, that's a difficult issue. And under these current circumstances, I think you all know what I'm talking about as far as national dialogue, the anti-vax movements, and the list goes on. This is going to be a Herculean task to explain in common language, culturally competent ways that this is a safe, effective product, and Americans will be encouraged to take it to protect themselves and their loved ones. So I think as we go forward, in addition to worrying about the logistics around this, the public messaging and relationships with the community will be absolutely critical. And that is one example of the all hands on deck activity, because it's not going to be bureaucrats or someone like myself. It's going to be, those community-based individuals, whether it be the local pastor, a local grassroots group, that is a trusted agent to help them understand and communicate the information, as well as every pharmacist and every physician in the community. The worst thing that could happen is, and we've heard this anecdotally, is for a patient to walk in and have their opportunity to speak with their family doc and ask them, should I get this vaccine? And for the physician to say, I don't know, I wouldn't do it, I wouldn't trust it. At the end of the day, if they've been educated and informed, that's their professional judgment. It is what it is, but we have to do our best to make sure that when they need to counsel their patients or their clients or whatever the individual be, it is with the most informed, objective, culturally competent information, so that they could do no harm in that process. With that, Krista, hopefully I've sort of filled in a few of the gaps, to round out your presentation, and be glad to answer any questions you may have.
I have one for you on the communications side. One of the things that struck me is that the states are really on their own on messaging, and that they are in coordination with the locals on messaging. So how does a state and local, create, are there going to be, focus groups or something at the federal level that are going to hone in on some messages that really work?
So it's a great question, because
all over. The states and locals and everybody's going to be all over the place.
Yeah, exactly. So, in large part, they will be relying on, federal agencies like HHS and CDC to create the major message maps that they can use. Because you're absolutely right. It makes no sense for 59 states and territories and 3,000 local health departments to write their own communication fact sheets and their own PSAs, and the list goes on. So there has to be that efficiency of common messaging that I think only the federal agencies can do with input from their local partners. But that's not the entire story. From everything I've heard from experts in risk communications, it also has to be customized locally. The message has to be sensitive to the environment, the circumstances, and conditions of the community you're trying to influence or engage. So that will be where the responsibility will be on the state and local, sort of taking these basic or master messages and trying to figure out how to customize it to your jurisdictions. Identifying influencers that mean more to the community than someone at a national level or international level. So that's a work in progress, and I think everyone recognizes is as we're getting these details for material management squared away, we also need to have a parallel effort, almost as rigorous and vigorous, to handle those messaging responsibilities.
Okay, thank you. We had a question in the chat about workforce projections. Are there any estimates about how many people are going to have to get trained on the vaccine and to administer the vaccine?
So my very scientific answer is a lot. To the best of my knowledge, there has not been any enumeration of the workforce that is required to do this. I think many of the states are using their models to basically start doing their own individual projections and rostering. Even when you think of a mass vaccination clinic, it's not just the individual that's putting the shot in the arm. There will be significant, concierge services that will be needed in the facility, the orientation, the training, if there's a fact sheet or a modified informed consent, if this is an EUA, there's an expectation that the time for counseling could be significant, more so than we saw maybe with what we see with flu. So that all has to be budgeted into staffing as well as throughput. We had just had a discussion yesterday. People think that it's not just the vaccinator. Security. Anytime you have a public event, you always have to have security. But there are three dynamics here that really changes that a little bit. So you may in fact have a situation where supply of vaccine, demand of vaccine exceeds the supply. So you may have security issues of that type of disruption. There's an anticipation that there could be these could be venues for anti-vax statements. And also we have communities that are being affected by—
Jim, I was already depressed. Don't make me more depressed.
Yes. You have communities with civil unrest, and you certainly, you don't want to sort of sacrifice one public mission for another. So, when we talk about workforce, it's just not the public health or clinical workforce. It's many of these other entities that are responsible for making sure that at the end of the day, a successful and safe vaccine is administered. So, it's hard.
So, question from the chat: do you anticipate one EUA at a time, or do you think there might be two vaccines that come out at the same time? I just share with you what I've heard. Because they're all in different stages of approval, one would assume that they probably will, reach their endpoint, however you define that, at a different point. So the concern that has been raised is, what if one or two, cross the finish line first, okay? What does that mean to all the others, And also, the question is, if they get a EUA, what are the plans to allow that vaccine to continue through the path to eventually get a full biological license application approval as well? So those are questions people are asking because they're all not, going to happen at the same time. So I can't give you an answer other than the fact that it's clearly recognized, and I guess there are a couple of different scenarios of how that will play out. Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask, are there any themes that you're seeing? Just a last question here. Are there themes from your members that you're seeing other than, we've got to make sure that the public feels safe getting the vaccine? Like on the logistical side, are you hearing from a lot of your members on a particular area that's thorny? Is it the cold storage, or is it the multiple vaccines, or any themes there?
Well, everyone is wondering about this ultra cold storage and how that's going to work. Also you had mentioned the 100 dose packaging in some jurisdictions like rural America. An approved vaccinator site may not need 100 at a time. So there may be a very significant repackaging to go into smaller lots to be shipped out to rural and frontier communities. So that's a logistical challenge they're addressing. They did raise the issue about the reimbursement, those few missing pieces about, the uninsured as to how the providers will be compensated for administration costs. The information from the field is that no one is saying that the providers are reticent to sign on because they can't be guaranteed to recover their costs. So that's good news. That's good news. But I think everyone is expecting that there will be a reasonable fix so that not only it's cost neutral to the individual, but also it doesn't have a financial impact on the medical providers that are providing the service. And the one last point, and I would really be negligent if I didn't raise this, is that in the planning phase, CDC and Congress, awarded $200 million to all these jurisdictions to get ready for this vaccination campaign. No funding has been appropriated for actually implementing the campaign. So during H1N1, which was a much smaller campaign, that was roughly $1 billion effort to the public health infrastructure to start and finish that campaign. And today, there is not any funding in place to allow that level of effort to go forward. Literally, as we're here today, I think Congress is debating, or at least the House is, a funding package to cover this, to address this, as well as other financial needs. But again, that as time goes on, and especially as we get closer to when the whistle gets blown, those types of resources will be critical to the success of a campaign like this.
I wish we had more time. There are other questions in the chat, but we've already taken enough of your time, and we're almost at the hour. Thank you so much. We hope that you'll come back and give us an update sometime soon. And I know this was very useful. We at Sirona have been getting questions on vaccine distribution. We plan on holding a second webinar on the 16th. We'll send out an invitation. I worked on H1N1 in the Obama administration, and my partner, Kristen, she worked at BARDA. We have, particular interest in this issue, and obviously it's going to be the issue du jour no matter who wins the presidential election. So we all have to keep our eye on that ball, and we're really glad that you're there for the states. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, and wish you all well, and thank you for your support and your investment and contribution to this campaign. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you too. Thank you.